You were not born to think inside walls. The mind you carry is not a fragile cage of inherited beliefs. It is an ocean of unclaimed continents, a sky that no map has ever dared to chart. The world has told you to stay within the painted lines, to follow the cartography of tradition, to accept the ceiling of what is possible as unbreakable. But ceilings are illusions, painted in the dim light of fear. Somewhere in you is the tectonic force to shatter them, to rise through the cracks and breathe in an atmosphere no generation before you has tasted. If you feel this stirring, if you sense a frontier calling, you are already at the threshold of the mental revolution. Like, share and subscribe, not for vanity, but for the shared signal that you too refuse the ordinary, for the fellowship of those who are ready to reimagine the human mind. The structure of thought, as most know, it is a construct, a centuries-old architecture built to contain the chaos of possibility. From the moment you could name the world, you were taught to compress its infinity into narrow categories: true or false, good or bad, right or wrong. This binary scaffolding feels solid because it is familiar, but in truth it is only scaffolding, never the building itself. Beneath it, there are thousands of dimensions to perception that ordinary thought never touches. It is here, beyond the rigid codes of mental habit, where the revolution begins. The first rupture in the wall comes from noticing the wall itself. Ordinary thought moves so quickly that it forgets its own limits, feeding you the illusion of completeness. Yet every belief, every interpretation, is only one angle on an infinite sphere. You may look at a single leaf and see green, but a bird sees patterns in ultraviolet, and a bee navigates a lattice of invisible electromagnetic cues. Perception is not the truth, it is the filter. And thought, in its ordinary form, clings to that filter as if it were the sky itself. The mental revolution is not about replacing one belief with another. It is about breaking the allegiance to belief as a final authority. It is learning to think without the invisible leash of expectation. Imagine holding a question in your mind without rushing toward an answer, letting it stretch and change you. Imagine looking at a problem and seeing not a set of steps, but a shifting landscape where logic and intuition dance, without one seeking to dominate the other. In this revolution, the hierarchy between the analytical and the imaginative collapses. Thought becomes fluid, sometimes crystalline, sometimes vaporous, always adapting. To begin this shift, one must confront the inertia of thought. Ordinary thinking is sticky. It resists change because it draws from the energy-efficient habits of the brain. Your neural pathways are like well-worn trails through a forest, so much easier to follow than hacking through the wild growth of the unknown. But the unknown is where evolution happens. In the mental revolution, you must be willing to step off the trail, to feel the disorientation of a mind with no prescripted route. This disorientation is not a sign of failure. It is the sound of the old architecture cracking. The mind that has been trained for conformity will seek comfort in agreement. It will reach for consensus, for the safety of shared assumptions. But the revolutionary mind is willing to stand in solitude, to question the unquestioned. It knows that every dominant idea in history, from the shape of the earth to the nature of reality, was once heresy. What separates the ordinary from the extraordinary is not intelligence, but the courage to hold a thought that others cannot yet bear. In the mental revolution, the boundaries between disciplines dissolve. Science begins to sound like poetry. Philosophy merges with neuroscience. Mathematics dances with art. The old silos of knowledge were designed to control complexity by fragmenting it, but the revolution thrives in synthesis. To think beyond the ordinary is to see patterns that cross every artificial division, to recognize that the structure of a galaxy and the structure of a human heartbeat are both expressions of the same underlying rhythm. A revolutionary thinker does not worship novelty for its own sake. This is not about chasing every strange idea or rejecting tradition wholesale. It is about a deeper calibration, a tuning to the frequency where truth reveals itself in many forms. Sometimes it wears the garments of the old. Sometimes it is clothed in the unimaginable. To live in this state is to understand that thought is a tool, not an identity. You do not defend it, you refine it, rebuild it, or discard it as the moment requires. There is an artistry to thinking beyond the ordinary, and like any art, it requires discipline. The mind must be trained to stretch without tearing, to hold multiple possibilities without collapsing into confusion. This means developing a tolerance for ambiguity, an appetite for the unknown. Most people treat uncertainty as a void to be filled, but in the revolution, uncertainty is a fertile field. The absence of a fixed answer becomes the invitation to grow. Memory, too, must be re-examined. Ordinary thought relies heavily on the past, treating memory as a fixed archive. But memory is malleable. Each recall is a reconstruction, tinted by the present moment. In the revolution, memory becomes a creative force, not a static record. It is used to expand the possible, not to reinforce the predictable. The past becomes raw material for futures that have never been imagined. Language is one of the most potent tools in this transformation. Ordinary language shapes and limits ordinary thought. Every word carries implicit boundaries. Revolutionary thinking often begins by bending language, by creating metaphors that stretch the frame of meaning until it cracks. Poetry, paradox, and symbolic expression become instruments for reaching places that literal description cannot touch. In this way, words stop being mere carriers of meaning and become catalysts for new worlds of thought. The body is not excluded from this process. Ordinary thinking treats the mind as separate, as though cognition happens in a sterile chamber above the neck. But the mental revolution understands the body as an active partner in thought. Every posture, every breath, every sensory input shapes the texture of your thinking. Movement can be thinking. Stillness can be thinking. To break the boundaries of thought, you must reclaim the intelligence of the whole organism. The revolution also demands a new relationship with time. Ordinary thought is trapped in a linear narrative, past leading to present, present leading to future. This creates a sense of inevitability, a deterministic flow that narrows imagination. But the revolutionary mind moves in spirals, loops, and leaps. It understands that time is not merely a line to walk, but a field to explore. It allows the future to influence the present to rewrite the past. At its core, this mental revolution is not an escape from reality, but an expansion of it. It is the refusal to settle for the smallest version of the truth. It is the act of walking to the very edge of what is known, leaning into the wind of the unknown, and stepping forward. The mind is not a container to be filled, but a horizon to be pursued. And when you break the boundaries of ordinary thought, you discover that the horizon moves with you, infinitely receding, infinitely inviting. The landscapes of the mind are vast, but most walk only in the well-lit gardens of familiarity. Beyond the hedges, there are territories of thought so strange and alive they resist domestication. These are the provinces of raw potential, where perception is no longer bound by the gravity of expectation, and where the ordinary scaffolding of reason dissolves into something fluid, luminous, and untamed. To enter them is to stand barefoot on the threshold of a different kind of existence, where thought is not a servant to habit, but a living force in its own right. In the chambers of conventional reasoning, thought is treated like a domesticated animal, predictable, well-fed, moving in circles inside the fence. The fence itself is invisible, woven from the wires of education, culture, and the subconscious agreements we make without ever questioning them. This mental corral ensures stability, but at the cost of greatness. The human brain was not built merely to recite the instructions of its predecessors. It was built to improvise in the presence of the infinite. To think in ways unrecognizable to the ordinary mind is to embrace the friction of paradox. Paradox is not a flaw in logic. It is the pulse of deeper truth. When the mind confronts two seemingly incompatible realities and holds them both without rushing to dissolve one into the other, a new dimension of thought emerges. This is the alchemy of higher cognition, transforming contradiction into synthesis, not by erasing difference, but by amplifying it until it reveals a hidden structure. The architecture of such thinking cannot be taught in the old style. It cannot be handed down as a fixed manual because it is not static. It grows in direct proportion to the daring of its host. It thrives when the thinker invites the unknown as an intimate collaborator, not as a hostile intruder. This requires courage, for the unknown has no predictable face. It can be beautiful, but it can also unsettle, strip away, and confront. Those who seek only comfort in thought will turn back here. Those who press forward will find that what was once alien becomes familiar, and what was once feared becomes a wellspring of creative force. At the foundation of revolutionary thinking lies a radical shift in perception. The awareness that reality is not a given, but a negotiated interface. The senses are translators, not pure reporters, and every translation is filtered by the mind's past experiences and current emotional state. What we call seeing is the brain's best guess, stitched together from fragments of sensory data and painted over with memory. The revolutionary mind does not fight this. It uses it. By recognizing the malleability of perception, it learns to reshape its interface with the world, expanding what it is capable of perceiving. To reshape perception is to rewrite the rules of possibility. Most people live inside a conceptual prison built from what they have already seen and felt. They move through life as if the present is a mere extension of the past. But a mind that learns to loosen its reliance on inherited imagery discovers that reality can be made porous. Through deliberate shifts in attention and metaphor and sensory focus, the revolutionary thinker begins to perceive the improbable as the possible, the invisible as latent. Attention is the first currency of this inner transformation. Where attention goes, reality takes shape. Ordinary thought disperses attention across countless shallow surfaces, exhausting itself in perpetual reaction. Revolutionary thought concentrates it, carves it into a fine point, and directs it with precision. In this way, the thinker becomes a sculptor of experience. What is observed begins to change simply because it is observed with depth and intention. In the deeper currents of this process, thought itself starts to change texture. It moves from the staccato chatter of surface cognition into the slow, resonant tones of expanded awareness. Here, thinking is not a sequence of words, but a movement of energy, a silent architecture being constructed beneath the threshold of language. The revolutionary mind learns to dwell here, to let thought ripen before plucking it, to trust the subterranean processes that do not yet have a name. There is an elegance in allowing thought to gestate in silence. For silence is not the absence of thinking, but the soil in which its roots deepen. Most minds fear silence. They rush to fill it with noise, with the static of repetitive concepts. But silence, properly entered, is a catalyst. It strips away the performative layers of thought, the need to be correct, the need to impress, the need to conform, and leaves behind a raw, unfiltered awareness from which unprecedented ideas emerge. From this soil of silence, pattern recognition blooms. Ordinary thinking perceives patterns in familiar configurations. Symmetry, repetition, cause, and effect. Revolutionary thinking perceives patterns that are nonlinear, patterns that bridge disciplines, patterns that emerge only when the mind has trained itself to see in multiple dimensions at once. This is why revolutionary thinkers throughout history have been able to make leaps that appear to others as sudden bursts of genius. In truth, they are not sudden. They are the flowering of seeds planted long ago in the rich earth of attentive silence. It is in this expanded field of perception that the mind begins to act as both receiver and transmitter. It receives signals from beyond the narrow bandwidth of conventional awareness, signals from the subconscious, from the collective memory of humanity, from the rhythms of nature itself, and it transmits new forms into the shared reality. Here, thought is no longer confined to the personal sphere. It participates in a larger ecology of consciousness, influencing and being influenced in a continuous exchange. In such a state, creativity is no longer an act of invention, but of translation. The revolutionary thinker recognizes that ideas are not created in isolation, but are drawn from a living field of possibilities that exists beyond the individual. To think is to reach into this field, to pull something across the threshold of awareness, and to give it form in a way that can be shared. The more skillfully one learns this art, the more seamless the translation becomes, and the more fluidly the impossible is made tangible. Yet this is not a path without resistance. The gravitational pull of ordinary thought is strong, reinforced by the collective habits of society. Every deviation from the norm is met with friction, sometimes subtle, sometimes fierce. The revolutionary mind must therefore cultivate resilience. This is not the hard, brittle resilience of stubbornness, but the flexible resilience of a tree in the wind, rooted enough to withstand pressure, pliant enough to bend without breaking. Over time, this resilience becomes an inner strength that does not seek validation. The revolutionary thinker ceases to measure success by external approval and begins to measure it by the depth of alignment between thought and truth as it is experienced directly. In this, there is a quiet sovereignty. The mind becomes its own territory, governed not by the rules of convention, but by the evolving laws of its own exploration. The expansion of thought also brings with it a heightened sense of responsibility. For when one learns to break the boundaries of the ordinary, the tools of creation and influence become sharper. Every idea has the potential to alter the trajectory of a life, a culture, a future. The revolutionary mind understands this and wields its insights with precision, not recklessness. It knows that to think beyond the ordinary is to touch the levers of transformation, and that such power must be guided by clarity and integrity. In the end, the mental revolution is less about escaping the ordinary than about illuminating it from a higher vantage. The familiar is not discarded, but reinterpreted, infused with depth and complexity. A street you have walked 1,000 times becomes a labyrinth of unnoticed detail. A problem that once seemed intractable becomes a doorway. A self that once felt confined becomes a horizon. To break the gravity of the familiar, the mind must learn to move as the wind does, unbound, invisible, shaping everything it touches while belonging to nothing it clings to. The ordinary mind builds pathways and patrols them. It finds comfort in the predictability of repetition, in the sturdy cobblestones of the known. But there is a limit to what can be discovered along a road that never changes direction. The mental revolution begins when the traveler steps off that road and into the wilderness of uncharted thought. In this wilderness, the landmarks of logic and the signposts of convention disappear. The terrain is not mapped by coordinates, but by textures of awareness, moments when the mind feels sharper, more porous, more alive. At first, there is disorientation. The familiar compass spins. The categories used to make sense of the world blur and dissolve. But beneath that initial uncertainty is an emerging clarity. The realization that these categories were never reality itself, only the grid we draped over it. To move beyond this grid requires a different kind of seeing, not the mechanical scanning of objects, but the deep gaze that senses the essence behind them. The revolutionary mind is not content to name the tree, to classify its species, to measure its growth. It wants to understand the tree as an unfolding relationship between earth and light, between the hidden geometry of roots and the slow mathematics of leaves. It wants to feel the resonance between the tree's silent expansion and the pulse of its own breath. In this way, observation ceases to be passive. It becomes participation. Participation transforms thought from an internal monologue into an ongoing conversation with the cosmos. Not a spoken conversation, but a mutual shaping. Every insight is an imprint of this exchange. The ordinary mind believes it generates thoughts in isolation, like sparks from flint. But the revolutionary mind begins to see that it is not the sole origin of its ideas. It is a receiver of signals, a translator of patterns, a conduit through which the unformed becomes the formed. This shift changes how the thinker approaches problems. In the ordinary mode, a problem is a fixed obstacle to be dismantled step by step, often by applying familiar methods. In the revolutionary mode, a problem is a living organism with its own ecology. The thinker does not merely attack it. They enter into relationship with it, tracing its roots, sensing its environment, noticing how it reacts when approached from different angles. In this fluid engagement, solutions emerge not as forced constructions, but as natural consequences of understanding. Understanding in this context is not simply intellectual, it is embodied. The mind alone can dissect, but to integrate, the whole being must be engaged. Revolutionary thinking draws on the subtle languages of the body, the way posture can alter perception, the way breath can open or constrict the pathways of attention, the way sensation can point toward truths the intellect overlooks. This is not mysticism. It is the recognition that consciousness is distributed through the entire organism, and that thought, divorced from the body, is like a bird trying to fly with one wing. Such integration creates a rhythm of thinking that is neither frantic nor stagnant. It is the rhythm of tides, ebbing into reflection, surging into creation, retreating again to replenish. In the ordinary world, speed is often mistaken for intelligence, as though the quickest answer is always the most accurate. But in the revolutionary mind, slowness becomes a strength. It allows for the fermentation of ideas, for the unseen connections to form. The delay is not hesitation, it is gestation. Gestation is where vision takes shape. The ordinary mind often tries to think its way forward with the light of what it already knows. But that light is limited to the past. The revolutionary mind learns to navigate in darkness, trusting the faint glimmers of possibilities that have not yet become visible. It is here that intuition plays its most essential role, not as a vague feeling, but as a refined sensitivity to patterns still below the surface. To cultivate this sensitivity, one must train the mind to listen beyond the noise. Ordinary thought is saturated with echoes, memories, cultural scripts, recycled phrases, and these echoes can drown out the subtle signals that point toward the new. The practice is one of subtraction, of peeling away the inherited noise until what remains is raw, unmediated perception. This is the mind's equivalent of clearing a fogged lens, revealing the intricate details that were always present but obscured. When the lens clears, reality reveals itself as layered and shimmering. Each moment is not a single slice of time, but a tapestry woven from countless threads, biological, emotional, historical, cosmic. The revolutionary thinker sees the shimmer and does not rush to flatten it into a single narrative. They know that the richness of reality lies in its multiplicity. By holding the layers without forcing them into premature order, they keep the door open for insights that could never arise from linear reasoning alone. Such insights often appear as sudden leaps, an unexpected metaphor, a synthesis of distant ideas, a vision of a structure that solves a problem in a way no precedent could predict. But the leap is only the visible part of the process. Beneath it lies the invisible discipline, the willingness to wander without a map, to stand in uncertainty without fleeing, to cultivate a mind that can stretch far without tearing. Stretching requires balance. Push too hard, and the mind fractures into incoherence. Move too timidly, and it remains imprisoned. The revolutionary path is one of continual calibration, like a dancer adjusting to shifting music. This adaptability becomes second nature, until the thinker can move between modes, analytical and intuitive, structured and improvisational, with the ease of breathing. Improvisation is vital, for the unknown is never static. The landscape of thought beyond the ordinary is in constant motion, reshaped by the thinker's own movement through it. A fixed method cannot survive here, only responsiveness can. This is why revolutionary minds so often appear unconventional. They do not cling to a single style, but change shape as needed. They wear ideas lightly, willing to discard them when they no longer serve the unfolding of truth. Discarding is an art of its own. Ordinary thinking clings to its creations out of pride or fear, mistaking possession for mastery. But in the revolutionary mind, letting go is part of the rhythm. Each idea is recognized as a stage, not a final destination. By releasing what has been outgrown, the thinker creates space for the next, more expansive form to emerge. This cycle of creation and release mirrors the very processes of nature, the leaf that falls to feed the soil, the tide that retreats to return with greater force. In living this way, the revolutionary thinker becomes less concerned with personal ownership of ideas and more concerned with the vitality of the ideas themselves. They are gardeners of thought, tending to what grows, pruning what stagnates, and allowing wild seeds to take root in unexpected places. Their allegiance is to the evolution of mind itself, not to the preservation of their own mental monuments. Over time, such living reshapes not only thought but identity. The self is no longer a static label, but a dynamic process, a constellation of shifting perspectives. The boundaries between thinker and thought blur. The mind becomes both instrument and symphony. There is freedom here, but also humility, for the thinker sees themselves as part of something much larger, a current of exploration that began long before them and will continue long after. In this humility, the revolutionary mind finds its greatest strength. It is free to range widely, to experiment boldly, because it is not bound by the need to be the sole source of its discoveries. It can collaborate with the unknown without fear of being diminished by it. And in this collaboration, thought begins to reach levels of subtlety and scope that the ordinary mind cannot imagine, not because it lacks intelligence, but because it has never stepped beyond its own fences. The fence, once seen, is never unseen. And once it is gone, the mind learns to roam with a sense of belonging that is not tied to any single territory. It belongs to the act of exploration itself. And that act, in its purest form, is limitless. The mind is a migratory creature, though most keep it tethered. It was designed to travel not only across landscapes of fact, but through territories of possibility, leaping between dimensions of perception as easily as a bird crosses borders. Yet in the comfort of the known, its wings grow heavy. The same patterns play in the same sequence, and the mind mistakes this repetition for stability. The mental revolution is the return to flight, not the random flutter of distraction, but the sustained, fearless soaring into regions without maps. To fly in thought is to risk the absence of anchors. The ordinary world prefers the mooring of fixed ideas, the certainty of settled definitions. But fixed ideas are like statues, impressive in form, yet incapable of growth. The revolutionary mind chooses, instead, the vitality of what is still in motion. It knows that the most profound truths do not fossilize. They move, shimmer, evolve. To live by them is to accept that they may transform tomorrow into something unrecognizable today. Such living requires a mind willing to dismantle its own certainties. This is the quiet bravery of the revolutionary thinker, to approach even their most cherished conclusions with the question, what if this too is incomplete? Not to live in perpetual doubt, but in perpetual openness. In this openness, thought becomes a horizon that recedes as it is approached, ensuring that the journey never ends. The journey deepens when the mind learns to read the language of patterns beyond the human-made. The movement of clouds across a late afternoon sky, the spiral of a seashell, the migration of birds, these are not mere decorations of the world, but expressions of an underlying intelligence. The revolutionary thinker does not simply admire them. They translate them into the architecture of their own thought. The shell becomes a lesson in proportion, the cloud a metaphor for impermanence, the migration a reminder that thought, too, must move in seasons. Seasonal thinking accepts the necessity of change. There is a time for expansion, when the mind absorbs, collects, and roams widely. There is a time for contraction, when it focuses inward, distilling what has been gathered into deeper essence. There is a time for rest, when no new ideas are chased and the ground of the mind lies fallow, gathering unseen nutrients. The ordinary mind resists this cycle, fearing the stillness as a void. The revolutionary mind honors it as essential, knowing that creation without rest leads to depletion, and rest without creation leads to stagnation. In this cycle, there emerges a profound respect for timing. Ideas, like seeds, cannot be forced to sprout before their moment. The revolutionary thinker learns to sense when an insight is ready to be brought into form, and when it must be left in the dark to strengthen its roots. This patience is not passivity. It is a form of precision. It ensures that when the idea emerges, it is strong enough to endure the winds of challenge. Precision in thought is not the narrowness of obsession, but the clarity of alignment. It is the ability to hone attention until it pierces through layers of assumption, striking at the living core of a question. The ordinary mind often mistakes accumulation of facts for depth, piling information upon itself like bricks in a wall. The revolutionary mind uses each fact as a stepping stone, but refuses to let them become barriers. It seeks the connective tissue between them, the thread that turns fragments into a living whole. To see this thread, one must look beyond the obvious connections. The ordinary mind searches for similarity, for the comfort of things that match. The revolutionary mind looks for resonance, which can exist even between things that appear unrelated. The curve of a violin's body and the arc of a planet's orbit may seem worlds apart, but each is shaped by forces seeking harmony. Such recognition allows the mind to bridge distances others believe are impassable. Bridging distances transforms thought into an act of synthesis. This is more than combining different fields of knowledge. It is weaving them together so tightly that their boundaries vanish. In this woven state, mathematics sings, art measures, and philosophy engineers. The thinker no longer sees the disciplines as separate rooms in a house, but as windows of one structure, each offering a different view of the same vast landscape. The vastness can be disorienting. When boundaries dissolve, the mind risks being overwhelmed by the sheer abundance of possibilities. This is where the revolutionary mind develops the skill of inner navigation. It does not try to grasp everything at once. It learns to follow currents. Just as a sailor senses the wind and chooses their course, the thinker feels the pull of certain ideas and lets them lead deeper. This trust in inner navigation allows for discoveries that cannot be plotted in advance. Inner navigation also teaches discernment. Not every path is worth following. Not every current leads to fertile ground. The revolutionary mind learns to distinguish between the shimmer of distraction and the glow of genuine insight. This discernment is born not from suspicion, but from intimacy with one's own patterns, knowing when the mind is chasing novelty for its own sake, and when it is stepping toward a truth that will change its shape forever. Such truths, when they arrive, rarely arrive fully formed. They appear as fragments, images, sensations that defy immediate explanation. The ordinary mind rushes to define them, to lock them into language. The revolutionary mind lets them remain wild for a time, knowing that premature definition can strip them of their vitality. Instead, it circles them, gathers impressions, allows the fragments to find each other in the hidden corridors of thought. The corridors of thought are not straight. They twist, double back, open into unexpected chambers. In these chambers, forgotten memories brush against recent experiences, and out of their meeting comes a spark. The revolutionary thinker does not try to force the doors open. They wander, they listen, they notice when the air shifts, signaling the presence of something worth pursuing. This attunement turns the mind into a finely tuned instrument, capable of catching signals others miss entirely. Signals come not only from within, but from the world itself. A phrase overheard in passing, a shadow cast at a particular angle, the way a drop of ink spreads across paper. Each can be the doorway to a shift in perception. The revolutionary mind remains porous to these moments, allowing them to enter without immediately demanding their purpose. Often, the meaning of such moments unfolds later, when the mind has prepared a place for them to take root. Rooting ideas requires both depth and space. Depth to hold them firmly enough that they do not blow away at the first gust of challenge. Space to allow them to grow beyond the thinker's original intention. The ordinary mind often strangles its ideas by holding them too tightly, refusing to let them evolve beyond their initial form. The revolutionary mind, in contrast, treats ideas as living companions, nurtured, guided, but ultimately free to become what they must. This freedom changes the relationship between thinker and thought. It is no longer a hierarchy where the mind dominates and shapes every idea into submission. It becomes a partnership, an ongoing dance in which both evolve. The thinker is shaped by the ideas as much as the ideas are shaped by the thinker. This reciprocity infuses thought with vitality, making it a living force rather than a static possession. And so the revolution continues, not as a single event, but as a way of moving through the world. Every encounter, every perception, becomes part of the evolving symphony of awareness. There is no final arrival, no definitive state of having achieved the revolution. There is only the deepening of the practice, the widening of the horizon, the endless unfolding of what the mind can become when it refuses to be ordinary. The mind is a frontier without end, yet many live as though it were a walled city with guarded gates. Its streets are familiar, its buildings orderly, its rules unspoken but binding. Within these walls, life feels safe, predictable, but safety, when clung to too tightly, becomes confinement. The walls that keep danger out also keep possibility from entering. And so, the mental revolution begins the moment you recognize that you have mistaken the boundaries of habit for the limits of reality. Beyond those walls lies a terrain both luminous and untamed. Here, thought is not a sequence of steps laid down by someone else. It is a wild river, carving its own path, changing course without apology. This river does not ask permission to flow where no map yet marks a channel. It moves toward its own expansion, and it carries the mind with it into places where the ordinary cannot follow. In these places, thought is stripped of its disguises. It is not logic pretending to be truth, nor emotion pretending to be certainty. It is raw awareness, alive, alert, unfiltered. In this state, the thinker sees not only with the eyes, but with the entire field of their being. Every sensation becomes a doorway. The faint shift in a shadow hints at an unseen geometry. The rhythm of footsteps in the distance becomes a clue to patterns that stretch far beyond the moment. Nothing is trivial, because everything is part of the fabric. The fabric of reality, when seen closely, is not uniform. It is woven from threads of perception, memory, intuition, and meaning. Ordinary thinking treats these threads as separate strands, measuring each in isolation. Revolutionary thinking understands that their strength is in the weave. The beauty of a tapestry does not lie in a single color, but in the way many colors blend and contrast to form an image neither could make alone. To perceive this weave is to understand that the mind itself is both weaver and thread. It is shaped by the patterns it sees, yet it also shapes them through attention. What you focus on lengthens its thread in the fabric. What you ignore fades into the background. This is not just a poetic truth. It is the mechanics of consciousness. Attention is the loom. Meaning is the pattern. And with each moment, you are weaving your version of the world. When you begin to weave with intention, the texture of your inner life changes. The ordinary mind weaves without looking, repeating patterns inherited from those before. It believes it is designing, but it is only echoing. The revolutionary mind pauses, looks closely at the threads, and asks, does this pattern still serve? Could another arrangement create something more alive? This is where the act of thinking becomes an act of artistry. Artistry requires risk. Every new pattern means unmaking an old one, and unmaking is rarely comfortable. The mind has grown attached to its familiar designs, even when they no longer fit. Yet the courage to pull at a single thread, to watch the known unravel so that the unknown can take its place, is the very heart of the mental revolution. In that unraveling, you make space for visions no one has seen and truths no one has spoken. The truths found here are not rigid commandments, but living currents. They shift as you move, deepening when you revisit them, transforming as your perspective widens. The revolutionary thinker does not try to freeze them into permanent shape, because to freeze them is to kill their motion. Instead, they are carried forward like music, each return to the melody adding a new layer of understanding. Such motion demands a mind that can move in more than one rhythm at once. There's the rhythm of logic, steady and measured, building structures of reason. And there's the rhythm of intuition, fluid and unpredictable, leaping over the gaps logic cannot yet cross. In the ordinary mind, these rhythms compete. In a revolutionary mind, They become partners in a duet, their interplay producing harmonies that neither could achieve alone. Harmonizing these rhythms is not about balance in a static sense. It is about responsiveness. There are moments when logic must take the lead, and moments when intuition must. The skill is in knowing which moment is which. This knowing is not learned from a textbook, but cultivated through experience, through the willingness to be wrong and to learn from the shape of that wrongness. The revolutionary mind wears its mistakes not as shame, but as evidence of movement. Movement itself becomes the guiding principle. Where the ordinary mind seeks to arrive, the revolutionary mind seeks to continue. Arrival implies an ending, a place where the journey is complete. But the frontier of thought has no such endings. Each discovery reveals further territory. Each question answered births new questions. This is not a cause for despair, but for wonder, for it means the mind will never exhaust its own capacity for expansion. Expansion is not only an intellectual act, it is a way of being in the world. It changes how you see others, for you begin to recognize that every person is also a frontier. Beneath their surface patterns lie landscapes you cannot yet imagine. The revolutionary thinker approaches others not as fixed identities, but as evolving constellations of thought and experience. This perspective breeds not only insight, but compassion, for it acknowledges that everyone is somewhere along their own unfolding. Compassion itself becomes a form of intelligence here. It allows you to navigate complexity without needing to simplify it into categories of right and wrong, us and them. It allows you to listen to ideas that challenge your own without immediately fortifying your defenses. In this way, compassion is not softness. It is a sophisticated openness, a willingness to let the world shape you even as you shape it. Such openness does not mean passivity. The revolutionary mind does not dissolve into every influence it encounters. It filters, selects, integrates with care. It knows that to accept everything without discernment is to lose coherence, just as to reject everything without examination is to lose growth. The art lies in holding the door open wide enough for the new to enter, but not so wide that the structure of your own thought collapses. Structure, paradoxically, is essential to freedom. A river without banks becomes a flood. Thought without form becomes chaos. The revolutionary mind is not afraid to build structures. It is only afraid to mistake them for eternal. It builds with the knowledge that every structure may one day need to be dismantled. This impermanence is not a weakness, but a source of vitality, for it keeps thought alive and responsive to the world it inhabits. Responsiveness leads to adaptability, and adaptability is what allows the mind to thrive in the unfamiliar. The ordinary mind resists the unfamiliar, clinging to what it already knows. The revolutionary mind leans into it, knowing that discomfort is a sign of expansion. It meets the unfamiliar not as an intruder, but as a teacher, offering lessons and perspectives it could never have generated alone. The more the mind learns from these encounters, the more it realizes that the boundaries it once respected were never fixed. They were agreements, often unspoken, made for the sake of convenience or conformity. Once seen as agreements rather than absolutes, they can be renegotiated or abandoned entirely. This is the final freedom of the mental revolution, to live without inherited limits, shaping reality in collaboration with its endless potential. The revolution is not a banner to wave, not a moment to declare victory. It is a way of thinking, a way of perceiving, a way of inhabiting the mind so fully that it becomes impossible to return to the narrow corridors of the ordinary. And while it begins within, its influence radiates outward. A single mind expanded beyond its limits can alter the course of countless others, simply by embodying what is possible. You are not here to inherit the patterns of thought handed to you. You are here to question them, to reshape them, to create entirely new ones. You are here to let your mind become the frontier it was always meant to be. This is the work of a lifetime, and it begins now. If you have felt the spark of this revolution within you, do not let it fade. Feed it, share it, challenge it. Let it challenge you. Break the boundaries that were never truly yours, and help others see that they, too, are free to do the same. Like, share and subscribe not to follow a trend, but to join a movement of minds that refuse the ordinary. The revolution is here, and it is you.